Okay, so we're gonna work the circular cast-on for the daisy chain pillow. This is a little tutorial on how to work circular cast-ons and magic loop for the first few rounds because we're just casting on 6 stitches. So very small circumference knitting. All right, so to begin, you're going to create this little circle that I have done using your contrast color yarn. So the yarn that will go in the center of your pillow. And how you'll do this is you're just gonna loop your contrast color yarn around like this, making a little X here, and then you're gonna draw the end through. So it's like a loose knot, and you can leave about 4 or 5 inch tail. This is the tail that we will pull tight later to create that tight circle with the stitches coming out of it. But for now, leave it loose. We're not going to draw that tight until a few rounds in. So you've got the loose knot up here. Then you're going to take your working yarn, just your contrast color in your left hand, and your needle in your right hand, and you're going to begin casting on stitches into this circle. So to start, we're going to create a yarn over stitch, a simple yarn over stitch, and then we're going to draw our needle through that circle, yarn over again, and pull it through. I'm going to do this a few times, so don't worry if that confused you. It's tough because it's loose on the needle, so it's going to feel a little awkward at first until you really practice it. But I'm going to show you again. So first you're going to create a yarn over, just like this. So I am holding the yarn tight on my finger here, my pointer finger here. So I've just done a yarn over, and then I'm gonna pull my needle through that circle again, grab the yarn again, pull it through. Now I've got 4 stitches on the needle. I need 2 more. Okay, so I'm gonna do 1 more yarn over, go into the center, that circle, pull a loop through. Now I have 6 stitches on my needle. The next thing we're going to do is simply slide our stitches all the way to the other end of our long circular needle. We are ready to work round 1 of the pattern, which simply says knit all stitches. We're going to do this a little bit like how an I-cord is worked. So we're going to knit all stitches. The working yarn will come from the end of the row. That is exactly right. Keep everything loose here. And you're simply going to knit that first stitch. It's awkward. Trust me, I get it. You're simply going to knit that stitch and knit all the way across that row. So it's very loose. We'll tighten it up in a second. So you can see I am a continental knitter. If you are a thrower, you'll throw it like that. So I'm simply knitting across that entire row. Truth be told, it takes me about 3 times every time I do a circular cast on to get it. So if this takes you a bunch of tries, don't get discouraged. I'm in the same exact boat and I've been doing this for a while. Okay, so now we can go ahead and tighten it up a little bit. And I would just suggest you do this gently. So you're gonna pull on that knot and be very gentle about it. The spun cloud yarn, if you're using the spun cloud yarn, breaks very easily because it's so loosely spun. So just be gentle. Actually, daisy chain that I'm using is a little bit better. You want to make sure you didn't lose any stitches. So I still have 6. That's good. And I'm going to move on to round 2. And you'll need a stitch marker to mark the beginning of the round at this point. What we're going to do is we're going to take all those stitches again and slide them to the center of my circular needle. So it's about here. You can see the cord here. And I'm going to draw that cord up through the middle of those 6 stitches. So I've got 3 on one side, 3 on the other. And I'm just going to draw them through like this. Okay. Let me move these out of the way so my cord doesn't hit them as pretty as they are. So you can see now I've got 3 stitches on the tip of this needle, 3 stitches on the tip of this needle. We want the working yarn coming from our back needle, which I do not have. So I'm going to go ahead and flip my needles so that the working yarn is coming from the back needle. This is my cast on. This is where I cast on. This is the end I'll have to weave in later. It's pretty long now that I drew it tight. That's all good. Okay, so I've got my working yarn in back, and it's coming from in between the needles, okay? It's not coming from back here. That's gonna create an extra wrapped stitch. You wanna make sure when you work magic loop, it's coming from the back needle, but in between the 2 needles. That's an important thing to remember in magic loop. Okay, so magic loop. The great thing about magic loop is small circumference knitting. So that means that we can get away with not having to use double pointed needles, which I do not enjoy knitting with, and use a long circular needle to create small circumference knitting in the round. So I love this technique. I use it all the time. So we will do each round in 2 parts, knitting stitches, half the stitches off the front needle, then knitting half the stitches off the back needle. So for round 2, you will simply take your working yarn. You've got your working yarn coming from the back. You will simply pull out your back needle, so the back needle here, and begin working the stitches in the front. Your front stitches here. Because you have this long cord, which I know is clear, so it's a little hard to see, you are able to do that. The long cord makes that all possible. And if I look at round 2, it says KFB all stitches. KFB is an increased stitch where we knit into the front and back of the stitch to make 1 stitch. So I'm simply going to knit into the front of that stitch and knit into the back of that stitch. So this is the back of that stitch. So I've knit into the front, I've not slid that stitch off my needle, and then I'm gonna knit into the back of that stitch to create a stitch. And then I'll slide it off my left needle, okay? So I'm gonna do that again, knit into the front, find the back of that stitch, there's the back of it, right there, and knit into the back of it. Okay. Now, let's do that one last time. If you're a thrower, you will simply be throwing through the front. Don't slide it off. And then going in through the back and throwing again. Now you can slide it off. So where I had 3 stitches, I now have 6 on that needle. Okay, now, the next thing we're gonna do with magic loop is pull this cord out to get all the stitches back on the tips of our needles. So I'm gonna pull this cord to get all the stitches back on the tip of the needle. Now I'm gonna turn my needles so that I have them in the same position that they were in when I first started the round. Just like this. Okay, there we go. So you know I already worked this portion of the round. These 3 stitches I still have to work to complete 1 round. The yarn is always coming from the back needle and coming up the center like this. So I'm gonna work these 3 stitches, KFB, for each stitch to complete that round. So I'm gonna show you how I do that again. So I pull out the needle from back. Because I have that long circular needle, it's super easy to do. Still a little awkward, I'm not gonna lie. One thing I like to do is I actually like to hold the cord and the needle together to prevent any gaps that can happen. So I do like to hold my work together like so, just to keep it pressed close. All right, then I'm gonna KFB. So knit through the front. Just showed you these stitches in detail. Knit through the back. Knit through the front, knit through the back, knit through the front, knit through the back. Okay, Now I have completed that round. I just knit it in 2 parts. I'm gonna pull that cord through because we always want to get back to having all the stitches on the tips of the needle. So I should have 6 on both the front and the back needle, and I'm going to rotate them again so that the working yarn is coming from the back needle, and so that my stitch tips are pointing this way. Sorry, I have a little cut on my finger. There we go. So it's coming from the back needle up the center, and the tips are pointing this way. So for me, that's to my right hand. Should be for you too. This is my tail I'll weave in later. So I've just completed round 2. One thing I forgot to mention, round 1, you may want to add a stitch marker. So stitch marker, here's a stitch marker. This is going to denote the beginning of the round. The thing about magic loop is that they're very easy to fall off. Stitch markers are very easy to fall off. So keep that in mind and be careful. But this is going to mark the beginning of the round. We are on round 3 now. So you're going to work round 3, a knit every single stitch in this same magic loop technique. Then for round 4, you're going to KFB all stitches again. Rounds 5 and 6, knit all stitches. Round 7, KFB all stitches. Round 8, knit all stitches. So you now know how to do all of that. We've gone through how to knit around and how to KFB every single stitch to increase your stitches. You're going to have to use this magic loop technique until you have enough stitches where you can knit in the round without having to use magic loop. So there needs to be a lot more stitches on your needle before you can knit in the round easily. You're all set to go. Let's meet up when it's time to change yarn and use your main color yarn. All right, excited to see you back here.